The American author Joan Didion wrote a book about the sudden death of her husband, The Year of Magical Thinking. She said, "Life changes fast. Life changes in the instant. On July 15th, 2010, my life changed in an instant. My husband, Stuart Dolan, following a regular lunch with a business associate where he made an appointment for a follow-up meeting, left his office in downtown Chicago and walked to a nearby train platform in Chicago. By the way, a train platform that he never would have used. As the train approached, Stuart took his own life. A trauma nurse at the platform said she observed an agitated man pacing up and down the track before he leaped. This came as a complete shock to everyone who knew Stuart. As many people have said, if there were 1,000 people that would take their own life, Stuart would never have been on that list. Nobody saw this coming. He had the perfect life. We were high school sweethearts who met when we were 15 and 16. We were married for 36 years, but had known each other a total of 42. To those who knew us, we were the bar that was set for what it was meant to have a fun, loving, connected, supportive, and caring partnership. My children, Zach and Barry, adored their father. Stuart always prioritized his family, and his most important role in life was husband, father, and friend. We were also, at the time of his death, debt-free. He was a senior partner of a large international law firm, managing hundreds of corporate lawyers. He enjoyed his work and derived satisfaction from cultivating relationships with his clients, as well as helping them achieve the results they desired. He was such a stellar leader that when he died, his law firm, Reed Smith, created an award in Stuart's honor. This is a quote from Reed Smith's website. The Stu Dolan Award for Client Service Excellence celebrates the legacy of the Reed Smith Chicago partner whose caring approach to collaboration and developing talent in others, along with an intense commitment to outstanding client service, set a standard for all Reed Smith lawyers. The Stu Dolan Award will be presented annually and in perpetuity to the Reed Smith client team whose performance best exemplifies those characteristics. He was 57 years old. If you asked anyone who knew him, he was laid back and high on life. There was an unbelievable disconnect between how he lived his life, a beautiful man, a beautiful life, the tragedy and the violence of his death. It just didn't make any sense. What happened that led to this horrible, inexplicable, shocking death? In the summer of 2010, Stuart developed some anxiety regarding work. He had no history of mental illness. At my suggestion, I thought he should contact his doctor to get on medication to help him deal with this situational anxiety. He was prescribed generic Paxil paroxetine. Very shortly after starting the generic version of Paxil, his anxiety became worse. He felt restless, had trouble sleeping, and was weepy. The night before he died, he kept tapping his leg at dinner, asked me to listen to a meditation tape with him, hardly typical behavior, and kept saying, "I still feel so anxious." He said he was going to get up the next morning and exercise to see if that would help deal with his anxiety. By 1:42 the next day, he was dead. How can I explain this? When you know a person for 42 years and you know them backwards and forwards, this just wasn't who he was. After Stuart's death, everyone kept trying to find clues, notes, emails. Nothing emerged. A friend of mine kept saying the only thing different about his life was he had been on Paxil for 6 days. Unbeknownst to me, she did her research and found a law firm, Bob Hedlund, that does Paxil litigation and went through the intake process. I didn't even know this. The intake coordinator said to tell your friend he suffered from a drug reaction, akathisia. I remember writing it on a piece of paper because I didn't know how to spell it. Nobody knew how to pronounce it. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I did all the extra reading in grad school. had never heard of that word. I went to my computer and Googled akathisia, Paxil, and suicide, and it was bone-chilling. I said, oh my God, that's what happened to Stuart. What had not made any sense suddenly became crystal clear. This was a heartbreaking realization that a drug that I thought was supposed to relieve anxiety or stress gave a person suicidal thoughts. The person didn't want to kill themselves, but wanted the inner restlessness and agitation to end. This lack of knowledge tragically resulted in akathisia sufferers like Stuart taking their own lives and leaving behind devastated loved ones. As one pharmaceutical expert said, death can be a welcome result. When I found out about akathisia and the lack of a black box warning for adults over 24, I knew that if this could happen to Stuart, that no one was immune. I also found out that GSK, the pharmaceutical company, had hidden for over 20 years that there was a 700% increase of suicide on Paxil. This is what made me motivated to make a difference. In fact, the drug lobby would like you to believe that akathisia is simply restless leg syndrome. As a result, sufferers of akathisia, as well as the medical professionals with whom they consult, are not able to recognize the symptoms of akathisia and haven't even heard of it. Had Stuart and I known the warning signs, we could have taken action to stop the medicine and then the deadly side effect. In June of 2013, I started MIST, the Medication-Induced Suicide Prevention and Education Foundation in memory of Stuart Dolan. I am on a mission to bring awareness to a word that no one has ever heard of, yet changed my life forever. MIST aims to ensure that people suffering from akathisia symptoms are accurately diagnosed so that needless deaths are prevented. We have a website, have created educational materials. We were invited to the United States Academy of Armed Services physicians, over 400 military doctors who were so excited for what we're doing because the increase of military suicides in the United States is unheard of, and this has been the most highly medicated group of veterans that ever have come back from war, and nobody wants to see the connection between the number of drug cocktails they're given and suicide. My story was featured on our local news channel, NBC5 Chicago, in 2014. For our organization, it's important to know that we're not anti-drug, but we want truth and disclosure, honesty in reporting, drug side effects, legitimate drug trials not controlled by big pharma. For me personally, as a social worker, I always suggest alternative forms of ways to relieve anxiety, meditation, exercise, healthy eating. My final thoughts is if Stuart is speaking to all of us today. When Stuart was in his first year of law school, he came home from a business law class and was upset. He had learned a phrase in that class, the cost of doing business. And he was disturbed by this concept as a kind and caring human being. He couldn't understand how lives could be lost to achieve profits. I've often thought of that over the last 5 years when thinking of Stuart's death by Paxil and akathisia. Stuart was the cost of doing business. However, it was a huge cost to those of all of us who loved and cherished his life. We are all here today. I have traveled very far to make a difference and try to prevent these needless deaths from happening to more innocent people. Thank you.
I'm not a teacher or a doctor. I don't have any statistics. I'm just a mammy. Our lives changed 2 years and 6 months ago. I'm not going to cry. We had the most beautiful 14-year-old boy, never sick. He had his tonsils out when he was 3. That was the only thing that was ever wrong with him. When he was 12 years old, he made the transition from primary to secondary school, which he found a little bit difficult, like most children do. Jake loved routine, and this was out of his comfort zone. So the school intervened and they thought it would be helpful if he saw a counsellor. So she referred him to a psychologist, and Jake continued to see the psychologist for 2 years, once a month, sometimes once maybe every 3 to 4 months. I thought occupational therapy or cognitive behavioural therapy would help Jake, and I asked the psychologist would that be possible. So in January 2013, she made an appointment for Jake to see her colleague, which I thought was an occupational therapist. We never had any dealings with mental health. I didn't know anybody in the mental health system, never knew anybody on antidepressants, anything. I was in work that morning, so my husband John took Jake to the appointment. It lasted all of 10 minutes, and he came out with a prescription for Prozac. There was no consent form, there was no explanation what Prozac was, and the reason he was given it was to get him through his exams. Jake had an IQ of 153. He had a condition called mild Asperger's. It's not an illness, it's a condition that no tablet will ever fix, and he was quite happily living with it. He was a normal teenager. He was going through adolescence, he was sitting exams. It's just anxiety, that's it. He walked out of an exam halfway through, which was highly unusual. He also had a meltdown, which was highly unusual, that night, which lasted about 3 hours. I thought of putting him in the car and taking him to our local A&E, but I thought they would think I was neurotic because he was sitting his exams. I never thought that medication could make you do that, because a doctor had gave it to us, a psychiatrist. So they wouldn't harm my child. Do no harm. That's the oath they've taken. So Jake wasn't monitored on Prozac. The dosage was doubled without her seeing him again. She gave a rolling prescription to the pharmacist, who our local pharmacist didn't think to include a patient information leaflet with the Prozac. On day 46, Jake shot himself dead with a .22 rifle, while his daddy and I were sitting downstairs. He had no history of suicide ideation, no history of self-harm, no history of depression. As I said, the only diagnosis they managed to make on him was mild Asperger's. This can never be fixed, ever. I was one of the most overprotective mothers in the world, so if it can happen to my child, well, there for the grace of God goes anybody's child. But what we're left with is fighting the Irish system. Because of Irish psychiatry, my Jake is gone. Despite Irish psychiatry, I'm standing here telling his story. But before I finish up, because I don't have an awful long story, because we're still in the middle of Jake's inquest, they have put us through the ringer, bringing all kinds of barristers and statistics in. We are not allowed to speak about Jake in Ireland because of prescribed medication. If my son had been on cocaine, I would have been allowed to speak about him. I would be behind bars. Now, in my eyes, the prescribing psychiatrist should be charged with manslaughter. I never signed a consent form. We were not informed. That is what this is all about, informed consent, how dangerous these medications are, and stop medicating our children. Let's let them be children. They have problems, you know, we have sadness, it's called life, and you pick yourself up and you get on. You don't just give them a pill. But just before I finish up, 3 weeks ago, we found an email belonged to Jake, which was wrote 24 hours before he died. I'll just read the first couple of lines. He had a little girlfriend in America who he loved very much, and he wrote to her. Just starting to feel down again, honestly. The anti-anxiety stuff is actually an antidepressant, which they didn't tell me. Probably doesn't make much of a difference, but I feel like I'm drugged to the point that it suppresses everything bad until it all suddenly spills out. And they were my son's drug little mind's words 24 hours before he died. Thank you very much for allowing me to tell Jake's story. Thank you.
I shouldn't be here. I should not have had to travel over 4,000 miles to come and speak to you about the untimely death of my little girl. a child whose life was ended due to a drug-induced psychosis caused by the unnecessary drugging with antidepressants. And she was not the only victim. We are all victims. We have lost our daughter. Our surviving daughter has lost her only sibling. Candace's death was needless. My name is Matthew Milling Downing. I am a teacher, I am an advocate, but I am a mother. You couldn't possibly know what it feels like to see your daughter happily curled up in her father's arms laughing, only to check on her an hour or so later and find her hanging from the valance of her bed. She was 12 years old, and she had her whole life in front of her. We had no warning that such an outcome was even possible. Candace had always been a happy, healthy child. She would never have intentionally hurt us this way. She was an honor student. She was an athlete. She was on swim team every summer. She played soccer, basketball, and lacrosse while in school. Everybody loved her and called her their friend. She was the one they turned to when they were sad because she always had a smile. Candace had a knack for making everyone feel better. That was her gift. When she died, school was closed. Her service had to be held in the school gymnasium as the more than 1,000 people that attended her service couldn't fit in our church. We had had a concern about Candace's anxiety over taking tests at school. She would study, know the material, and then do poorly on exams. This was partially due to her horrible left-handed writing, which teachers could not decipher, but it was also due to her inability to recall information in this type of setting. She would freeze. When I voiced these concerns to her pediatrician, he was not alarmed. She came from a loving, supportive family and a very nurturing school environment, and he felt that the situation would improve on its own. But that if I remained concerned, then I should take her to a child psychiatrist. It was the biggest mistake of my life and my daughter's. We were not in the psychiatrist's office 10 minutes when we were handed a sample pack of Zoloft, the miracle drug, the drug that brought up images of happy bouncing blobs surrounded by pretty fluttering butterflies. What could it hurt? I'd read the brochure while I was sitting in the doctor's office, and the only warnings were that initially it might cause a little dizziness or an upset stomach, nothing to worry about. The doctor handed me a sample packet that was in the shape of a fan, which had pills in rows of pastel colors, each color signifying a different strength. Candace was to take the little green pills at the top, and the doctor told me I could give the rest to my husband. That's another story. The packet contained no warnings at all. Where was our screening? Where was our blood test to see if the medication could even be tolerated? It was not until we had an autopsy performed following her death that we learned that Candace had been unable to metabolize this drug, and it had been building up in her system for quite a while. We were never warned that SSRIs or antidepressants had been found to cause worsening anxiety, insomnia, restlessness, akathisia, or severe irritability and agitation, or ultimately irresistible urges to commit suicide. We didn't know that many families had been voicing their concerns about these drugs since the FDA hearings in 1991, the year my daughter was born. We didn't know that 2 out of 4 of every 100 children risked having this happen, and that's probably a low estimate. At the time of Candace's death, there was no black box warning. There was no disclaimer of possible suicidality in children under 18 years of age, and that was later raised in 2006 to under 25 years in age. Candace didn't need this drug. In fact, she was fighting off all the ill effects of antidepressants at the same time that the dedicated teachers of her school had created test accommodations to lessen her anxiety. At the beginning of 7th grade, the psychiatrist decided that her dose should be doubled. I was not in agreement, but he commented to me, "What are you worried about? Kids take 100 to 200 milligrams a day without any problems." Well, Candace had a fatal problem on 100 milligrams. Early on, she had told me that what really reduced her anxiety was plenty of physical activity, but I trusted the doctor. What about drug transparency? After all, isn't the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm? And again, what about drug transparency? We learned through depositions that Candace's psychiatrist was being paid by Pfizer to push sales for Zoloft and had received tens of thousands of dollars to do so. An article written on drug transparency in Business Week entitled Medical Conflicts, Doctors Under the Influence speaks specifically about what happened to us and our daughter. Why is the standard now greed before need? In January of 2004, Candace had a severe reaction after ingesting an additional pill. This same wise doctor had told her that if she ever got nervous about an upcoming test at school, she could take an extra Zoloft pill at night. She became loud, irritable, paranoid, and began experiencing tremors. I called the pediatrician, who said to call poison control. They told me to take her to the hospital, that she was experiencing serotonin syndrome. There she would be monitored. Candace became very nauseous and vomited the pill as soon as entering the ER. While in the hospital, Candace received both Versed and Ativan intravenously. Her heart rate doubled, her pulse went up, and she began running a fever. Instead of monitoring, she ended up in pediatric intensive care for 4 days. I begged them not to give her any more drugs, and they told me they couldn't make that promise. Her hallucinations were so bad, so scary, that I had to lay in the hospital bed with her. When we asked what was happening to our daughter, the doctors told us, we have no idea. The hospital never informed us that they had enlarged her heart or that her vision was ruined, never to be the same. She never again slept through the night or ate another meal. They also managed to give her another dose of Zoloft at 4 times her prescribed dosage and then sent her home when her vital signs finally stabilized. Her life was being destroyed, and I couldn't stop it. We left with no warnings or precautions, only to see the psychiatrist on Friday. Candace attended school that day. He had told us not to give her another Zoloft until he saw her. When we went to see him after school, Candace worked on homework until we saw him. She finished her map for the following week. He thought she looked great. She was happy, she wasn't anxious, she had taken a math test that day at school and had done quite well. He said to come back in 2 weeks and not to take any more Zoloft at that time. Candace did not live another 24 hours. At the time, we were also unaware that sudden decreases or discontinuation of a medication like this could prove fatal. I guess that was unimportant, unnecessary information to share with families. Following her sister's death, my surviving daughter experienced focusing issues at school, and I was notified about the schools concerned. They wanted her checked. Perhaps she had ADD and needed medication. She'd always been an honor student, and her grades were slipping. No kidding. She was traumatized. I would have been more concerned if Caroline had not had a reaction. I made the appointment, but stipulated beforehand drugs were not an option. I had lost one daughter to antidepressants and was not about to lose another. She tested as gifted in several areas except for repeating random series of numbers. Given the history, they were in agreement she was reacting to her sister's sudden horrific death. Therapy was suggested, but it was a moot point since Caroline had begun art therapy within a week or so after her sister's death and continued all the way through high school during the next 3 years. She ended high school with honors and was class speaker. In May of 2009, the Washington Post ran a rather lengthy article entitled, "After Depression, One Rallied, One Did Not." While neither of my girls suffered from depression, the article was about whether or not to treat children with antidepressants, even for off-label uses, and the possible outcomes. The fact that Caroline thrived without the use of any drugs, continue on as an honor student all through college, is a testimony to the benefits of therapy without use of medication. People need to work through their feelings and not mask them by medicating with deadly chemicals. I was thankful that my surviving daughter was aware of the fraudulent practices when her entire class at college was screened for mental health issues. Without exception, every student was told they had suicidal tendencies and needed treatment and medication. This was in no small part to the openly vague questions on the survey, sponsored, of course, by the pharmaceutical industry. What if the students hadn't realized it was nothing more than a ruse to create a wider drug market? What if my daughter Caroline had not been proactive at school? I'm quite honored to be here with the like-minded. Ironically, Denmark was the final stop on the last trip I would ever take with my daughter, and she loved it. I've kept her mementos from that trip. Then in November of 2007, I was approached by the Danish magazine Community for an article entitled The Lost Generation, which tells Candace's story. In Norway, the documentary Prescription Suicide, a film about the adverse reactions of antidepressants that happened not only to our family but to 5 others, was shown nationally 2 times in one summer. This documentary has been shown all over the world repeatedly. Stories about Candace have been featured all over the world and nationally on every television station. Candace represents what can go horribly wrong if we are not informed. We have a right to informed consent. We didn't get that. Innocent children continue to needlessly be killed by these drugs. Please join us in helping to right the wrongs by ending the unnecessary drugging of our youth and help us to promote safer, more effective ways to deal with children in crisis or unease. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. God bless you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Peter for this invitation to tell firsthand accounts of what can happen. But also, I'd like to thank you for your bravery, for taking on this issue and being willing to confront the psychiatric drug epidemic. Unfortunately, this is more than just a debate over the validity of scientific evidence. As you've heard, there are real life and death consequences to the issues being discussed here today. 12 years ago, my life looked very different than it does today. I was married to my best friend, had a successful career in advertising, and was planning to have a family. However, all of that changed with one phone call. On August 6, 2003, I became a widow. Woody, my husband of almost 10 years, was found hanging from the rafters of our garage, dead at age 37. Woody wasn't depressed, nor did he have a history of depression or any other mental illness. Woody was outgoing, gregarious, smart, had a huge personality. Everyone loved him. He had just started his dream job as vice president of sales with a startup company selling energy-efficient lighting 2 months prior and starting having difficulty sleeping, which is not uncommon for entrepreneurs. So Woody went to his family doctor and was given Zoloft, off-label for insomnia. The doctor said Zoloft would help take the edge off and help him sleep. 5 weeks later, Woody was dead. The 3-week Pfizer-supplied sample pack that Woody came home with automatically doubled the dose, unbeknownst to him, from 25 to 50 milligrams after week 1. No cautionary warning was given to him or me about the need to be closely monitored when first going on the drug or dosages changing. In fact, I was out of the country for the first 3 weeks he was on this drug. Within days, Woody started experiencing all the side effects like profuse night sweats, diarrhea, worsened insomnia. He also experienced other side effects that Pfizer knew, akathisia, but did not warn Woody or his doctor or even his family. Shortly before he died, I found Woody curled up on our kitchen floor with his hands around his head like a vice and going, "Kim, you gotta help me. I don't know what's happening to me. It's like my head's out to my body looking in. Kim, help me." Little did I know what that meant. We calmed him down. He called his doctor the next day and said, "You got to give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in." 5 weeks, he made it. From the beginning, Woody's death did not make any sense to anyone who knew him. Everywhere I turned, the so-called experts and suicide support groups were telling me Woody must have been depressed. But in the deepest part of me, I knew something did not add up. Why would a guy who loved life take his own life? So we started to dig into the only thing that had changed in his life, and that was the addition of Zoloft. Woody and I never questioned the drug. Why would we? Zoloft was given, it's FDA approved, given by his doctor. It was advertised and sold as safe and as effective. Ironically, the day that Woody was found, the front page of our local paper had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. So that started our journey. Our journey for the truth has taken us to the FDA, Congress, the courts, and the media. Unfortunately, I quickly learned that Woody was not an isolated case, or anecdotal, as the FDA liked to refer us. I find this ironic since the FDA had a hearing in 1991 when it was just Prozac, 13 years before the first black box warning came on before kids, and all the other drugs that came after Prozac. In the battle for Woody, we were able to get confidential internal Pfizer and other drug company documents made public that showed that they knew of the risk of suicide, violence, and not to speak of the questionable efficacy, but failed to tell the public. I hand-delivered these documents to the FDA, members of Congress, and the media. I can't believe it's been 12 years since Woody's death, and we're still having this debate. In some ways, I think the situation's gotten worse. Where's the public outrage? It seems everywhere you turn, there's something about mental health in the headlines, whether it's another mass shooting, a high-profile suicide like Robin Williams, or a kid who has difficulty focusing in school. The conversation never is about the drugs. It quickly turns into the need for more mental health services, more screenings, more treatments to address these issues. But what if less is actually more? The public has been convinced through drug company marketing, psychiatry, and the medical establishments that mental illness is a biologically based condition. Everyday life distresses and problems are being sold as undiagnosed mental disorders caused by a chemical imbalance requiring a pill solution. Oftentimes, as we've heard, without full disclosure of the dangerous side effects. There are a lot of powerful self-interests at play in this current model of medicalizing life stresses. We have Big Pharma, we have the American Psychiatric Association, and various patient advocacy groups such as the National Alliance for Mentally Ill. They all have something to gain. Drug companies are highly motivated to spend billions of dollars selling illnesses to push their pill treatments. The media is there to protect their ad dollars. The APA and psychiatry want to protect their role as being the trusted medical institution that really understands psychiatric care. Meanwhile, 70 to 80% of these drugs are being written by GPs, and often after a 5-minute visit. In today's world, mentally ill is such a vague and general term that it lacks any real meaning. The APA's DSM has set up such broad definitions of what a psychiatric disorder is that 1 in 4 Americans are said to suffer from some kind of mental illness, and that undesired behaviors, grief, sadness, ADHD, substance abuse, they all get classified as mental illnesses. There's got to be a better way. For starters, I'd like the conversation to change from mental health to mental well-being. Mental health implies a sickness model. The current narrative of the medical model is that untreated mental illness threatens the safety, the security, and health of the general public. Therefore, we need more treatments. I feel passionately that something needs to be done. I don't want to get another email like I did yesterday from a 49-year-old, or from a guy whose 49-year-old father-in-law shot himself on Saturday after being given Zoloft from his doctor because he was feeling a little down because him and his wife were splitting up. We got to do better for Woody, for Candace, for Stuart, for Shane, and for Jake. We need to empower the public to challenge the current mental health system to ask, what if less is actually more? But we've got to first start the debate in a public forum. So thank you, Peter, for giving us this opportunity, and thank you for listening to all of our stories.
It is difficult to say anything after this. In fact, we should have silence. It is so overwhelming to hear your stories. There are more people in this audience who have similar stories. One of them, living here in Denmark, his son hanged himself in a shipyard crane. He didn't have a psychiatric disorder, just like your stories. And there are other people as well. I have written about 8 of these people in my book, and I have photos of those who died, which my publisher didn't really understand. It will make the book more expensive to have color photos. And I said, well, that can't be much, and I want these photos. And now I will ask you about something. My book was reviewed in the Danish Medical Journal 2 days ago. Whom did the editors ask to review my book about psychiatry? You will have one guess. The chairman of the Danish Psychiatric Association. So what do you think the book review looks like? I have submitted a comment on the book review where I say that there are, I think, 5 untruthful statements about my book and about my person. Not only that, he was dissatisfied that a scientist like me couldn't stick to the science. Why I also told human stories and played on feelings. Okay? So these deaths are now playing on feelings. And I actually wrote in the book, why do I do this? Because you want me to tell your stories to help others not ending up in the same tragedy. And because 1,000 deaths is just a number, just a statistic, but when you put faces on deaths, you start paying notice. So I cannot thank you enough for this. It was very moving, and I just don't know what to say. But now we will have questions. And it can be about almost anything. So if you 5 will come up here so you can answer questions.
Can I, in the meantime, ask how many people have lost someone to psychiatry?
Well, do you mean who died?
Yes, who died?
Oh, those I know survived, so they were lucky.
Yes, so you know whom you know.
That's about 20 people. I think 25 perhaps, I don't know.
That is despicable.
One of you mentioned NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill in United States, which is a relative organization, which it turns out gets a large pot of its money to run from the pharmaceutical industry. And when I was in my despair, part of starting a parent organization here in Norway in 1995, I didn't know how this corrupted system works. And the first thing that happened was that Pfizer offered us money. And some of the relatives wanted the money to run the organization. We started fighting it because we felt that would corrupt or endanger us in some way. That danger is still in any family parent organization that doesn't read up on the literature and listen to people like you and Peter and Robert. So I must say thank you very much for sharing your terrible stories. I lost my son, he was 28, and what they said when he was dead, all of a sudden, I got a call from a Norwegian doctor, and he said something I didn't really understand till it had sunk deep inside me. He said, maybe it was for the best. And if I hadn't read the history of the Second World War and what German doctors and German psychiatrists let themselves be used to do, I wouldn't have understood that attitude. But that attitude is still with us, and we have to fight it. Thank you.
Thank you for your stories. I would say this is not, what I will suggest is not a solution to the problem, but when I go to Norway every year to something called Amalie Days, Amalie Skram was an author which already in 1890 was very critical about psychiatry. She was buried here in Denmark, but she was dug up and put on the graves for the unknown. But in Norway, they have a very good tradition, because they have a grave which is called the shame grave of the shame, and every year parents of people with mental health problems and so on, and youth organizations, we come there every year to talk about the victims of psychiatry. And then there's a mass in the church for those who want to go in there, where the priests also speak about the victims of psychiatry. We should have something like this in Denmark also, just to make it visible, but also to have a place to share our grief. And maybe we should demand the politicians to say, we need a year, one day, which is holy, for where we can praise all the victims of psychiatry.
This is not a question. I would like to say that we will have a film festival in Gothenburg, 16 to 18 October, which will present the different images, alternative stories than what is presented within the traditional psychiatry, where we have invited speakers, 27 different speakers, movies from a lot of countries. If those of you who are here have a possibility to come, it would mean a lot.
Can you tell us what it is called so that people can Google it?
Yeah, the name of the film festival is Driving Us Crazy.
Driving Us Crazy?
Yes.
Okay.
And many people being here today will be there also to present both movies and their own lived experience and research. So have a look, please, and search for it at the website. You are very welcome.
Thank you.
I almost feel like we should have candles and we could go and light up a candle. This is what we do in our organization that we have started, Death in Psychiatry. Once a year, we honor the dead.
I was incredibly moved by these tales of woe, and but what I think is needed is something that hasn't happened, which is a debate on the evidence that was presented to, so to speak, draw out the psychiatrists that are being that are the the objects and the subjects here, and you referred to that text, the review of your book in our Medical Association journal, which I also read, of course, and I think there's a need for a scientific or academic discussion of the evidence. It is a more effective way of moving on, I think, because with the incalcitrance of the psychiatrist, I think speaking in each part, so to speak, of the forum and never listening directly and answering questions and commenting on the evidence. Without doing that, I think it'll be a much more difficult task to move on, because some of these affairs here will be taken as things that remind some psychiatrists of cult activities or whatever, and I think we need to move beyond that. And I think it is possible to have this academic discussion where this evidence is presented and debated, and I think that is needed, because and that's why I think incorrectly he referred to he commented on the feelings, but I think he's never going to be swayed by the feelings, because he has probably heard of tales of woe in many cases. So it is the discussion of the evidence that is going to help advance this cause.
Let me reply to that. And as usual, your comments are very, very useful. So I thank you for them. The evidence is rather crystal clear as far as I can see, but you can't talk to people who refuse to listen. And this is exactly what mainstream silverback psychiatry is about. They have given up listening. They won't listen. They live in a fantasy world, which I call it. And Lundbeck's former director said on the radio that antidepressants protect children against suicide. It's directly against the evidence. And some psychiatric professors in Denmark even claim something similar, that it hasn't been shown that these drugs are dangerous. It's only suicidal behavior, not completed suicide, they say, repeatedly. So are we supposed to believe there is no relation between wanting to commit suicide, preparing for a suicide, and then the actual suicide is a completely different animal? This is so ridiculous, and it makes me angry. So, Albert, you can't talk to these people. That's why I've given up on them. They will never change. And whether I talk science to them or feelings to them, some of them don't have any empathy. Not the slightest bit. They should never have become psychiatrists in the first place. Peter. This is very clear. So, I'm up against an overwhelming power, the drug industry, the wealthiest and most criminal industry in the world, and a lot of corrupt psychiatrists. I'm up against that, but I'm fortunately not alone. So what I'm doing is I'm counting on the science. I don't feel they can beat me there. They have tried, but they haven't succeeded. And if I want to, I will also tell about personal stories, because they are incredibly important. And these stories that we have heard today, in all cases like these forensic studies from Australia, there was no good indication for using an antidepressant. Not at all. These people acted in an out-of-character fashion, often associated with akathisia, that is very well documented. This predisposes to suicide and homicide. So people might call your losses anecdotes, as you said, Kim. These are not anecdotes. Already in 1999, there were more than 2,000 reports of suicides on fluoxetine to the Food and Drug Administration. In 1999, more than 2,000. I cannot say that fluoxetine killed all of them, but they definitely did kill some of them.
With all due respect to your comment that you made, firstly, I wish it was just a tale of woe. My son isn't a tale. It's not a fairy tale. It's not a tale of woe. It's fact. My 14-year-old child is not coming back. Now, let me be very, very clear on something. We had a non-diagnosed, non-depression, non-suicidal. The only thing that changed in my child's life was 46 days of Prozac. Now, what I forgot to mention, but thankfully I've got this opportunity again, was that Jake was brought back to the psychiatrist. And when I told her he had a meltdown, he walked out of an exam, he had diarrhea, he was waking up early, he was finding it difficult to sleep. What I was actually told was, that will wear off in 3 to 4 weeks. Stay with the meds. So you have said you're a psychiatrist. Am I correct on that? No. Okay, right. You seem to be pro-psychiatry today.
Let me just tell you, Albert is a neuroscientist and a very good one. And I have a lot of respect for him, and I am very pleased about the questions you have. So
that's fine, Peter, but I'm a mammy, and I'm a very good one too.
Yes.
Okay.
While you attempt to minimize us by calling us tales of woe, as Kim had said, we are not anecdotes. These are real-life situations. I want you to know from a psychiatric point of view, Dr. Joseph Glenn Mullen, who was chair of the psychiatry department at Harvard, wrote a 114-page paper on my daughter, complete with all the scientific facts you could want to support that what I'm telling you is true. And for you to minimalize that is very disturbing to me. Very disturbing. I didn't do that. No, I am not a tale of woe. I am an angry mother who is here to support you.
I mean, I actually like when we get other points of view, because I think we're always talking to ourselves. So the one thing that we had done with, we put on a conference called Selling Sickness, and we brought all these different peoples together, and one of them was lawyers. And so it's really hard, having the debate. I mean, I have debates all the time with like GPs, because that's really my thing, is that GPs are handing it out, but they just buy the psychiatry and the science. But once you actually see documents and it's in their own, it's Pfizer's letterhead, it's talking about the clinical studies that they buried, and that when you start seeing it black and white, and then you put all of our stories that are real life stories, and then you put science, it actually starts to tell a bigger picture. So I actually would I wish that we would get people, psychiatrists here, that would actually start to listen to what we're having to say. So.
You said that you wanted the evidence to be discussed. Well, it was discussed. It was discussed at Shane's inquest. We had a psychopharmacologist, David Healy. We also had the assistant state pathologist who said he felt that SSRIs were causing people to kill themselves. He said of the last 5 autopsies he did, 4 were recently introduced to SSRIs, and he asked people in Ireland to do something about it. But Irish psychiatry decided not to. But the evidence was discussed.
I am a huge supporter of the medical profession. Most of my friends are doctors, and inevitably, here's my feelings. Yes, there are doctors who don't follow good practice, just like social workers and lawyers. What I think is the biggest tragedy is most doctors are visited by a really, really cute drug rep who has a really cute body and really pretty. And they sometimes bring meals, though the meals have had to be eliminated. And a lot of doctors are getting free prescription samples, and they're being told what the side effects are based on what a drug rep is giving them. And so where I am very supportive of the medical profession, and like I know there's problems with all of them, I think that we just have to get more active. I would love somebody anywhere in the world to support legitimate drug trials where independent scientists who are not funded by government, by FDA, or not funded by Big Pharma, would look at Paxil and say, gee, what really happens during the early stages? I think that would be a wonderful way to fund, and it's an impossible situation. So I really believe in the doctors are just not being informed. And, they're only as good as the information that they're getting. So I welcome the discussions on that as well. Thank you.
My name is Anders Tingman. I'm a psychologist, and I want to have a question related to the last of the speakers from Minnesota. You said that you actually want to go from mental health to mental well-being, and I think that we should think about this also about the term treatment, as Peter uses. As there was a discussion about should we use pills for treatment, or should we use psychological treatment? But I think we should be wary of using this term of treatment, because just like mental health, I think treatment, as it is understood as like a technical treatment for a specific disease, it is also like a reduction of the field here. So actually, I think the root problem is that we as a society have handed over the power to people who are educated in medicine to define what this field is all about. So therefore they uses the medical vocabulary. They force it on all these kind of phenomena, grief and all kinds of problems. So I think it's not just about treatment. I think more like in open dialogue and stuff, they use a much broader intervention to help people reintegrate in life, treatment is just one of.
Yeah, could I suggest one thing? Yeah, let's call it interventions and not treatments.
Sure, but my question is, what do we do about this thing that we have historically handed down the power to the medical profession to define what this problem is about? Because then. Yeah, how do we take it back, or how do we take it out of the hands of
yes, psychiatric patients should take back their lives. They are responsible for their lives, not their psychiatrists. That's the first thing. And we as professionals should realize that biological psychiatry has by and large been a disaster. We need to get away from that.